Okay, let's begin with just a very general basic definition of the overall concept. Maya, setting, what is it? Where the conflict, I like how you talked about conflict, that's good. Where the conflict happens, not just where, but what else? Setting is two parts, where and? Very good. The time and place of a story. Remember that we cannot just focus on the place, we also must focus on the time. That is as important as the place. Both of these are vital. I like to think that when you think setting, you might think of something relatively superficial and simple, but if you consider that the setting is really the world of the story, the world in which the story takes place, I want you to think of setting in a sort of grander way. It's more than just this room. It's more than just the woods outside, Gesundheit. It expands beyond that. I want to talk about some of the different complex levels of setting. Let's ask first, what does setting do for a story? Setting is time and place. What does it do for a story? How do authors use it? What effect does it have on the reader? Okay, but that's kind of redundant, right? So what does the time of the story do for you? It tells you what time it is. Isn't that kind of the same thing? I'm looking to extend a step further, Alexis, to think, okay, now what effect does that have on me? Yeah. Thank you. Mansoor.
It affects the characters in like ways of weather and like time.
Can you give me an example? Because I think you actually have a couple different ideas floating together here.
Kind of like if it goes in the setting of early America,
Mm-hmm.
there would be like they would have like gunshots in the background. And
Mansoor is getting to it. It helps you understand the rules that shape the conflict, how the characters deal with the conflict, and so on. Let's take a really easy example. Here's my problem. Lost in a city. Big city. Lost, sure, New York, what have you. I need to find my way to a specific location so I can be not lost anymore. You can always write down examples, yes. How do I solve that problem in 2013? I'm lost in a city. Rami.
you can go ask the one for where you are.
Sure. What do you think I would do?
Go to the police.
Well, yeah, that's ask for help. Come on, 2013.
You would take like if you have a smartphone or something, you could take that out and see where you are.
I watch movies and notice that certain situations, certain conflicts have changed because of the advent of smartphones. 30 years ago, you would not have been able to do this. We take Mansour's idea. The rules drastically change. How do I solve the problem of being lost? Well, in 1750, that's a different sort of problem than in 1983. In 1983, it's a different sort of problem than in 2013. The differences in setting with the same problem change the problem. Sometimes it's more serious. Sometimes it's less serious. I'd say out of those three, it's most dangerous to be lost in a city in 1983. 1750, those cities are probably not that big. Probably not all difficult to find your way to where you need to go. 2013, there are too many nice electronic ways to find yourself not lost anymore. 1983, huge cities, and you don't have the technology to find your way around easily. The difference in setting changes the problem, changes the rules of the world. Excellent. What else can it do? What else can setting do for me? Gives me the rules of the world that govern the conflict. Mansoor?
It can decide what character is where.
More than that. That's one aspect, a little bit superficial. Let's go further. It determines the nature of characters. One of my favorite novels. It's a novel by an author named Robert Heinlein. It's called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and it's about colonists on the moon who live in 1/8 gravity in a very dangerous and rough environment. And they're pioneers of a sort. Think of early American colonists that must deal with all sorts of challenges. It makes all of the colonists on the moon in that story pretty self-reliant, pretty independent, no nonsense. They don't really have time for talk. They just have to do things because they live in a dangerous environment where a mistake could kill them at any moment. The story at one point goes back to Earth, and everybody there is just obnoxiously superficial. They talk too much. They don't get to a point. They're too involved in politics, and they waste their time. The contrast between these characters is brought about because of the contrast in setting. Setting helps determine who your characters are, and it helps you, as the reader, understand who those characters are. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Wonderful novel. Highly recommended. One last task of what the setting can do. Let's ask ourselves in this way. Let's reflect on this class for a moment. I try to play around with the light level in this class. Try to use lamps as opposed to banks of fluorescent light. I like natural light from outside, but we don't get a ton of it. So I do what I can to lower the light levels, make it a little bit softer. Why? Alexis? Oh, excellent. To help the computers, you can see those more easily. That is true. Paul?
Like you can, I know what you mean by it, like, I just don't know how to describe it, like, so you feel more relaxed.
That's exactly how you describe it. You feel more relaxed, possibly more comfortable in an environment like this. I don't know about you, but I feel uncomfortable under banks of fluorescent lights. It makes me feel like I'm in an antiseptic hospital or something, and I don't feel comfortable in that environment. I feel comfortable in this lower light setting. So I try to do something like this to make myself comfortable and to make you comfortable, which means that the third task of setting is that setting determines mood. The way a setting is described can determine your mood. And actually, Paul, the way you described that by talking about relaxed is exactly where we need to go with this. Can somebody define for me specifically mood? What does mood mean? Paul?
How you feel it, like,
Who's the you, though?
how character.
No.
Oh, we're talking about how the reader.
How the reader. We've got to have the reader, Paul. No, that's okay. But when I talk about mood as a specific literary device, if I were to say give a mood analysis of this short story, you would have to tell me how the short story is making the reader feel. So to summarize, the first two of these, Monsieur figured out. The third one I've given you. So it helps the reader understand the rules of the story, how characters are able to solve conflicts, what rules they must obey. Setting helps the reader understand the nature of characters, who people are, how they act, how they behave, how they're likely to act and behave. And finally, setting creates mood. Setting's important. Setting is the set of rules, the fabric by which the story unfolds. What I just gave you was a summary of what you already had in your notes, so don't worry about it. What are the different levels? We covered this in pre-assessment briefly. Somebody remember what 3 different levels of setting are? 3 different ways of looking at setting? Yeah, Matthew.
Historic, culture,
Nicely done. Thank you. Historical is the first level. And remember, that's when we're just talking about the time of a setting. Historical doesn't mean a setting that is in the past, as many of you thought. Historical just refers to the time frame of the setting. Where in history does it appear? Past, present, or future, and where specifically? So that's pretty easy. This one's pretty easy. Physical is the place of the setting. So actually, a description of light in here would be part of the physical level of the setting. And the last is cultural, the culture of the setting. I apologize for the sort of circular nature of that definition, but you guys, I'm sure, know from your social studies class that culture is a huge word referring to many different concepts. Religion, ethnicity, politics, race, traditions, dress, food. Many different considerations come into culture. So I'll let you get that down, and then I want to apply it to 3 skeleton key. Please pull your book, desk next to you or in your lap, however works best for you. Find 3 skeleton key. I believe we're on page 162. (162), 3 skeleton key. Somebody want to pick one of those levels of the setting and explain? Paul? Okay, talk to me about the physical level of the setting.
It takes place on a very small island.
Small island. Keep going. Did you get a sense of where in the world this small island is?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep going. Guyana. Mm-hmm. And where is that located? Okay, so off South America. Surrounded by the Atlantic. And what's in the Atlantic? in this particular story? What's the ocean filled with around them?
Sharks.
Sharks. Yep. The island is so small that you can't even really take a decent exercise walk on it. Good. And it seems also to be a rocky kind of island. Good. Historical. Can somebody use the clues from the information around the story, or possibly even clues in the story, to tell me what time period we're dealing with in Three Skeleton Key? Matthew. Very early at most. And you know how I know that? By looking at the author's life. So look at the author right there, George G. Toulouse. He lives from 1847 to 1904. We assume that he's setting it in present day for himself. So it's probably late 19th century. Can anybody tell me a clue from the story that tells you that it's late 19th century? Something that's in the story that we really don't use anymore, not for commercial purposes.
Wooden sailboats.
Wooden sailboats, absolutely. We use them for fun and recreation, but we don't use them for commercial shipping. Yes.
Can I say about the lamp they use is with fire, not like an actual light bulb?
Excellent. They light oil for the lamp. Good. So all of this tells me a little bit about the setting. Now remember we talked about how the setting helps determine the rules for the story. What can they not do for rescue that we would probably do today? Call somebody on the phone. Late 19th century, phones are still in development, and guarantee that some island off French Guiana does not have a phone. They probably don't even have a telegraph. Which is why the story makes sense that their only options for actually receiving any help are with the signal light itself. Anybody get a sense of the culture of the setting? French, but this is not France, right? Which means that it's a French colony. In other words, Europeans came over and took land from indigenous people and decided that they're going to build their own structures and their own economic practices into that land. This is not Europe. French colony also brings me to mind of the government. These guys are government workers, which means they will appeal to the government for help, which they do. The firefighters who come out on the ship, those are government officials also. So we have a world of government workers asking for help from government workers. That helps me understand the story. How this story will play out, how it will develop, who the people are. Definitely gives me a feeling, a mood. And if I look at all three of those levels, I can be sure that I've completely considered the entire setting of Three Skeleton Key. But I'm going to leave that there because some of you will delve more in depth. Let's turn to a different concept. This is our third concept of the day. First, we talked about setting and its implications. Second, we talked about the three levels of setting. And now we're focusing on imagery. Alexis? No, I would keep it all in the same notes because these are all three related. Gesundheit. But Alexis, I'm sure you'll feel your own comfortable way around bolding and underlining and heading and bulleting and such. Can somebody give me a definition of imagery? Alexis. That is true. However, imagines in what way? I want, you're right, but I want something a little bit more specific. Lizzie?
How the setting would look.
That's part of it. Look is definitely part of it. And we've got actually all five senses. Even though we think imagery, oh, I'm thinking about visual impressions, we actually have all five. We have sight. I should give me another sense.
So
Sound. Kurt, give me another sentence. Lauren, how about another one? Haley, do you have the last one? It's okay. You know how I love to focus on the language we use. Sight is your noun, visual is your adjective, and that's the pairing of all 5 of the senses. So we can't just focus on visual impressions. And there's something else in the definition that I want to draw your attention to because it's also vitally important. We are always looking at words, and when we look at words, that means in our discussion of imagery, I want you to pull quotations. I want you to look at specific words that are used to convey sense impressions. Words and phrases. And the writing that you'll finish or begin tomorrow will include quotation support. And I want to give you some practice for that writing. So let's play around with this kind of analysis. Let's pick up Zoo, a story you've not yet read, on page 195. Bryce, you have a nice, loud, clear voice. Could you read the first 195, 2 paragraphs for me?
The children were always good during the month of August, especially when it began to get near the 23rd. It was on this day that Professor Hugo's Interplanetary Zoo settled down for its annual 6-hour visit to the Chicago area. Before daybreak, the crowds would form long lines of children and adults both, each one clutching his or her dollar and waiting with wonderment to see what race of strange creatures the professor had brought this year. In the past, they had sometimes been treated to 3-legged creatures from Venus, or tall, thin men from Mars, or even snake-like horrors from somewhere more distant. This year, as the great round ship settled slowly to Earth in the huge Tri-City parking area just outside of Chicago, they watched with awe as the sides slowly split up to reveal the familiar bird cages. In them were some wild breed of nightmares, small, bird-like animals that moved with quick, jerking motions and constantly chattered in a high-pitched tone. The citizens of Earth clustered around as Professor Hugo's crew quickly collected the waiting dollars, and soon the good professor himself made an appearance wearing his many-colored rainbow cape and top hat. Peoples of Earth, he called into his microphone.
Okay, stay on that page. That's all we're going to read of that story, just the first page. Talk to me about imagery. Scan back through what Bryce just read. Pull words or phrases that describe sense impressions and give them to me. Max. 3-legged creatures. More. High-pitched Is it tone or tongue? More. I could pull another dozen words and phrases from this page. Aisha. Say again? Okay, clutching. What are they clutching? Clutching dollars. More. Kim. Hard cages. More. Mark. Great. Round ship settled slowly. More. Horse-like animal. More. Keep going. There you go. More. Not bad. Not everything, but definitely not bad. Looking at those words and phrases, I'd like you to give me emotion words. They could be adjectives, they could be nouns, but words that describe emotions that are triggered by these images. In other words, how do you feel? Give me something more than happy, Max. It's a little bit of a general word. I want something a little bit more specific. You're about to see three-legged creatures from Venus and tall, thin men from Mars and snake-like horrors. How do you feel?
Odd.
Odd. I like that. Anxious. Cody, what'd you have? Curious. Excited. Anything else? Nervous. Yeah, the snake-like horrors probably gives that, right? So now let's start making some connections. Why do I feel nervous and anxious, which are very similar terms? Why do I feel these two? Probably because of this word snake-like. And when you connect snake-like to cages, oh my gosh, what am I going to see? The description of those animals in those cages start to make me feel a little bit anxious. Why do I feel excited? Well, probably because I'm seeing animals from Venus. That's pretty cool. Why do I feel awed? Who said awed? Why do I feel awed? Thank you. Very good. Great round ship coming down. Of course I feel awed. Max, where does that ship have to land? A large parking lot outside the city. Can't land in the city because it's too big. Can anybody tell me another image on the page that also gives me an immense size to the entire event and what's going on? Great round ship, large parking lot. Cody.
Chicago?
Oh, that's true. That's true. It's a big city. I hadn't even thought about that. Yes, but I'm thinking more of an image that I see in this particular scene.
Long lines of children and adults both.
That's right. Long lines of people. Long lines of people, massive crowds, great round ship, slow descent into a big parking lot. Of course, this is going to make me feel awed and excited. Follow along with me, please. We're in Moodle. Moodle.sylvaniaschools.org. And I'd like you to be in the literature block. You can log in as a guest if you don't want to log in with your ID. We'll get you in there quickly. Aisha? Just try opening Chrome again and seeing if... Oh. That's interesting. Strange. Just look at this screen for a moment, okay? Pull up the analytical writing assignment. I know that you've already taken a look at this handout, but the lovely part of having an online class is that I can modify the handouts even after I've given them to you, and this has now been updated. Scroll down to the examples. Remember the first example, I gave you an example of a conflict with the open window. Now I have an example of a setting writing. In Zoo, Edward D. Hawke builds a mood of excitement through his description of Professor Hugo's interplanetary zoo. The zoo lands in Chicago at the beginning of the story. As visitors approach it, Hawke describes its size by writing that it landed in a huge Tri-City parking area just outside of Chicago. The visitors watch as the sides slowly slid up to reveal strange and horrific creatures. The initial descriptions of these animals adds to the suspense and excitement. Hawke describes them as a wild breed of nightmare. This description of the size of the zoo and the terrifying nature of the animals excites the reader about what the visitors will find inside. Hawke has used the setting effectively to develop this eager mood. Look at that. Adds to the suspense and the excitement. So Paul was talking about suspense and anxiety. We've got excitement over here that Aisha had brought up. This is exactly what we've just done in discussion, translated into an analytical paragraph. And it's pretty easy. Notice it also looks pretty sophisticated because you're using quotations in there to look at exact words and talk about the implications of those words. I've never seen a standardized test that does not include imagery analysis. In other words, you will be asked some sort of imagery-based, mood-based question on every standardized test. It's almost guaranteed. It's the only type of question that I can pretty much guarantee on the test. And this is the type of thinking that's involved. It's taking a look at a quotation and saying, hey, this leads to this emotion. And there could be a number of answers, just as you gave me a number of answers that are all correct. And if Max wanted to use the word awe to describe the feeling more than excitement, he's right, I'm right, we're both right, because the interpretation allows a little bit of creativity and personal subjective opinion. But the writing here is clear. Use the quotation to discuss the feeling. And the assignment's the same. Analytical writing number 2 is graded with the same rubric as analytical writing number 1. Paul, you had a question?
I'm confused on how to set this up.
Set it up in Google Drive or just set it up?
No, just how to do it. I mean, I've read through everything multiple times, but I still don't get analytic writing number 1. So.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, Paul. We will settle all of those little questions about setup in a moment. Let me assign prompts, and then I'll provide you with the help you need. Scroll up. Writing number 2, due on Friday by 3 p.m. You have 3 prompts. They're all basically the same prompt, just with different stories. Wiki Tiki Tavi on the banks of Plum Creek, and 3 Skeleton Key. So let's see here. I'm going to do this randomly this time, so please listen for the letter of your prompt. A, B, C, 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 A, B, C. Okay, so you have a prompt. And if you wish, you can go into the analytical writing file that you already have. Below my graded rubric, just write the title, Analytical Writing number 2, prompt A, B, or C, whichever one I just gave you. So why don't you do that now? Go into your drive. Do not create a new file. That's it. Good, good. Nope, don't create a new file, Lizzie. Just build on the last file that you had. Yes, Kamira? I'm sorry? Sir. You can if you wish, or you can just put it right below the rubric on the same page. You know, when we're dealing with electronic files, we don't have to worry about conserving paper so much. Scrolling down is scrolling down. So here's what you should do. Your first step is to look back at the story and do what we did with Zoo, which is try to pull some words and phrases that you think are imagery first, and secondly, convey a very strong mood. And it could be just about anything. Sometimes that imagery will just jump out at you. Snake-like horrors. The great ship slowly descended. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more subtle, like people gathering in lines. But anything that conveys those sense impressions. If I were you, I would type down some quotations that I found useful, and then I'd look back at my list and think, huh, how does this make me feel? And as you saw, that answer usually comes really quickly. The task is really pulling those quotations out. So you pull those quotations out, you look at them, you think, oh, I get it, this is making me fearful. Or I get it, this is making me feel isolated and alone. I get it, this is making me feel optimistic and happy. And then you write about it. Your writing will take place during class tomorrow. However, you can go about this in a couple different ways. We're going to have just barely any time at the end of class today. You could take a look. You could overnight, develop your evidence, type some quotations or think about some quotations. You could even, and this is sometimes a good way to do it, use post-it notes in your book. That's a really convenient way to mark in a book that you're not allowed to mark in. So you could write that down. Develop your evidence and then come in and write tomorrow. During class, you'll have the majority of class to write. Or you could write tonight, do the whole thing tonight, come into class tomorrow and ask for my help during the writing time to revise it or work with other students. However you'd like to go about it. But I'm going to end on this. Many of you, as we talked about, are facing some fairly low grades in this class, and you want to raise them. It starts tomorrow with a 20-point analytical writing. It continues with a 10-point vocab research assignment due on Friday. I want you to think about 2 ways to improve your grade. 1, look at the analytical writing that I already graded for you. Think about the mistakes you made and don't make them again. If you don't understand the mistakes or how to prevent them, ask me. Secondly, I want you to pay attention to my model examples and the notes that I give. It's all right there. If you want to understand how to analyze the setting of Rikki Tikki Tavi, then take a look at the way that I analyze the imagery here in Zoo and look at the notes. All of that should be pretty clear. And as I said, tomorrow's work time and question time. Do you have questions about the assignment generally? Okay, then that's that. You've got a couple minutes if you want to, but don't forget that I would like you to put the Chromebooks away and make sure that you are plugging them in when you do put them away.